In this video, we'll be talking about how I went from some drawings to a 3D printed, working 1/18 scale pinball machine. Hi everybody, I'm Adrian from Zanza's Toys with another video about our 1/18 scale working pinball machine. In this video, I'm going to walk through how I actually made it and all the iterative steps that went into taking it from the rough idea to something I'm pretty happy with. So let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing I did was to work on the flipper mechanism. And it was immediately apparent when I started in on FreeCAD that there was a much simpler way to do it. So instead of having some complex like loop around system, I just moved where the rubber band is to the other side of the fulcrum. And that gave me something that would apply force in the direction I wanted it to. So printing that out looked like this. So this was the first test piece I made with the much improved from the sketch flipper mechanism. So once I had this all ready to go, I also made a housing because I can't really test this alone, right? So I always like to print it's always good to work on the thing you're least confident about first to make sure that the overall project makes sense. So for me, that was definitely the flipper mechanism. I felt a lot more confident about the back panel score display mechanism. So yeah, so I made the flipper, then mechanism. Then I also had to make the housing, or what I'm calling the housing, so the main body of the pinball machine, and the buttons to press, right? So those came out like this. So here is V1 of the housing and V1 of the buttons. So the way that this works is you place the buttons in through the holes here and drop the play surface that's been assembled. And more on this, I'll show exactly how this goes together in the third part of the series, the assembly. But I'm going to drop this in. Okay, so this was the first test that I had. And if I press the buttons, you'll see it works. But the bad news here is that I'm getting very little play, right? And so I had to kind of rethink things a little bit, but I noticed that if I just pressed in with a pen, I got a much better draw. So what that suggested is all I really needed to do, rather than rethink this whole mechanism, is just make these longer. So that's what I did. So I replaced these with slightly longer versions. Now I put those in. Now I get much better action. So pretty much it was a pretty simple change to make these work. And that pretty much stayed that way for the rest of the project. At this point, I was feeling pretty good about the basic flipper mechanism, and it was time to work on the back part. This was the first iteration. You can see that there's one window here, and I just wanted to make sure that this all made sense, that dropping a BB down here could make something spin. If you look, since this plastic is a little bit translucent, you can see that there's black lines. And so what I did there is, at this point I hadn't made the stickers yet. What I did instead is I just drew some lines with Sharpie to make sure that I could see something happening in this window. And yeah, this worked out pretty well. So at this point I had the two pieces. They were 90 degrees to each other though, so that was something that changed. I felt like I basically had the base mechanism worked out. So you can also notice that there's no hole here, right? So far, there's no way for these two things to join, and there's also no hole for the ball to come out. But now that I was pretty satisfied that the flippers would work and this back panel would work, it was a good time to start working on sort of polishing features. So one thing that happened was I added some more to the play surface. So the original play surface was pretty bare, right? It was a bare minimum I could get away with to just prove the concept. And I replaced that with, I added a nice little bit of edging around it to make it a little more pinball-y, and also to have a gap there for the ball to come through there. And this just works the same way. Nothing really changed about the flipper mechanism. That was settled on pretty early and was stable. And if I drop that in here, we can see that we've got basically the same thing, right? It's a nice flipper mechanism. Next thing I did was to work on the assembly. So I wanted to make sure that things went together at the appropriate angle. Thanks to the references I found at dimensions.com, you can see more about that in the first part of the series. I knew that I wanted a 6 degree angle for the pinball table. I went back and I added some holes to the back of I added an angle, a little offset to the back of the housing. And then I added both some pegs to the back panel, as well as some holes to the housing, which would allow me to glue them together. I also made some improvements to the backsplash in that I added a second window. Because it occurred to me that as I was it was around this time that I also made the first pass of the stickers. And it occurred to me that I could just have 2 concentric rings of numbers and have 2 numbers that change rather than 1. And why have 1 if you could have 2, right? It was also the case that the length of the flippers made it so it was much more challenging to actually get any play out of the pinball machine. And what I really wanted here is, it's not a working pinball machine. It's more of a toy, right? So I wanted to make sure that you could actually flip the flippers and have the ball bounce around. And so I made the flippers longer. And that meant that you kind of have to deliberately let the ball go to get it to fall out. But that's okay. It's more important to me because getting your hand to drop the ball and then over to the buttons, I didn't want that to be a challenge. I wanted people to just have a good time with it. Putting that all together led to this version. So what's going on here is this is not glued down, but we can see that we've got the hole so the BBs can actually come out. We've got 2 gaps for the back panel. You can also see that at this point I had made my first pass a sticker for the back panel and a sticker for the interior, or for the numbers inside. Yeah, and this let me do a little bit of a test. I also, you can see that this is angled, so we've got an angle to the pinball table, and we've got a few other things. I added legs and a little cup to hold the ball when it falls out. So at this point, it was pretty much, it's getting closer and closer to done. So this is in pretty good shape. Action still works well. Oh, you can also see that the flippers are longer. Yeah. You actually kind of have to have them like 1 up and 1 down for the ball to drop off the table. But again, I thought that was good. I wanted this to be something where you could just play with it for kind of as long as you want. This was all feeling pretty good. So I continued to iterate. So the next steps were to basically work on cosmetics. So here's the next version. And what's new is I made a sticker for the play surface. And I also made some indentations in the play surface to hold stickers for one that says 3 balls and one that says 25 cents. It was definitely an old school, cheap pinball machine. It's also kind of like the overall aesthetic is definitely an older pinball machine kind of look. So printing all that out and assembling it again led to this version. So there's not a lot that's super different here. I also made some minor changes to the inside of the back panel. Because this version of the back panel spun really easily. But this version spun not quite as nicely. So the differences were that there was a little bit of thickness added by the sticker. And I also tried having 5 fins rather than 4 inside, and I think that also didn't work as well. In this version, what I had is I made the back panel just 1 millimeter wider, and I also added a little bit of an offset to the front panel, to a little bit of a spacer to push the rotating wheel back a little bit, and that made this loose again. So there was that. Yeah, and this is the version that I used to shoot that teaser video. So at this point, I was very happy with pretty much everything, except obviously the big lacking thing is there's no bumpers, right? So that's a problem. Also, I had to use a lot of super glue to hold this down, so I glued it. To keep this solid, I ended up gluing the play surface down to the offsets in the housing, and that worked, but I had to use a lot of super glue. I had to really work the flippers a lot as it was setting up to make sure that the whole mechanism didn't seize up. And this mechanism is still pretty tight due to the super glue. So that was a problem. So there were two more things I wanted to add. I wanted to make sure that this had bumpers, because it wouldn't really feel like a pinball machine if there wasn't something for the ball to interact with in the play surface. And I also wanted to solve this problem of having to glue this down in an awkward way and risk, seizing up the whole mechanism. So the solution I came up with for that was to make an additional part that would snap down on top of the pinball machine. And that could both hold a piece of plastic as fake glass, and if I got the tolerances right, it would hold the play surface down. Ideally, I wanted it to be the case that you didn't have to glue the play surface down, because it's possible that the rubber band could snap. And if you've printed out one of these and you really love it, it'd be nice if you could actually swap the rubber band out. That's something that people pointed out about my oscilloscope, and it kind of got me thinking that, when possible, it's nice to have user serviceable parts, right? That led to this, which is the final version. So it's still, I'm calling this sort of like the final prototype, because it's all printed in this slime green, which is what I tend to use for prototyping. But you'll see that there's this, well, there's bumpers. I just added 4. I didn't want to go overboard, because I still wanted there to be enough room for the ball to really bounce around and kind of get wild in there. But I also, it kind of isn't pinball without that, right? Oh, I should also mention that all the art so far, this is sort of prototype art as well. It's lifted from public domain images of 1930s sci-fi magazines, which is great. I did end up making some more stickers and some slightly better cropped art, which I'll show in a minute. But I just wanted something to kind of proof of concept the art. So this art is somewhat still placeholder. But the big difference is I can snap this off. So if I pull this out, so what I have is just a piece of plastic that fits in, and this part just snaps on, and you'll see that this is actually still loose. So I can take that out, and I can put that back in. I could replace the rubber band if needed. So yeah, so now this is loose, and if I were to just press these, the bottom part of the play surface would push up quite a bit. This isn't really stable by itself, which is why I used a bunch of super glue in the previous version. But if I take this part and snap it on here, now I get something that's pretty stable. I can take my hands completely off the top and still be able to work the flippers. Yeah, I could add some super glue to keep this down, and if anybody chooses to do that, I think that's totally valid. But even if you still use super glue, putting a little super glue here on the snap-on part is it's one, a lot easier, and 2, a lot safer, and that it's much less likely to work its way down into the mechanism and make the flippers not work. Yeah, so we went from sort of this to this, made this along the way, then we went to that, to that, to this. So let's talk about how I made the stickers. FreeCAD has this really nice feature in that you can choose a part and project it orthogonally as an SVG. The first time I did that, it came out really big, and I brought it into Inkscape and changed the size there, and it was a little fiddly. But what was not obvious is that for some reason, when FreeCAD does an orthographic projection, it scales it up. If you project a part and just make sure you choose the part and change the scale to 1, then you don't have to worry about it. So what was great about that is I could just project the parts that I wanted to design stickers for, add it to a drawing, and then bring that into Inkscape, and I had exactly the part. So that's what I did for a few things. I did that for the play surface. I did it for the back panel. I also did it for the sides of both the housing and the back panel to get some nice stickers, some nice art. I actually made a part in FreeCAD that is never meant to be printed, but it just fits the fake glass, right? So I also projected that, and that became a nice template to use to cut out some clear plastic to serve as the glass. Once I had all those, it was basically, there was a fair amount of editing in Inkscape, but it was all fairly straightforward. Once I had the base shapes that I wanted for the back panel, the sides of the housing and the sides of the back, I used that a lot to make a few different variations on art for the pinball table. I just made the play surface once, and I used kind of a little bit of a wood texture, kind of going back to, again, like sort of an older version of pinball. I was pretty happy with, ideally, it might have made sense more to make a custom playfield for each iteration, but I kind of like just keeping the playfield constant, and then it makes it really easy to take some art and make some really nice, just use the back surface and the sides to customize it per pinball machine. Once I had all the template shapes that I needed, I wanted to fill them up with art to make some really cool looking pinball machines. So what I ended up doing is going to publicdomainreview.org, which has a bunch of really awesome content of various kinds. But I looked through their collection and found some really great stuff that I thought would make for really fun and interesting, visually appealing pinball art. It was pretty straightforward to use that in Inkscape. The only trick was something I hadn't used before, is you can clip a raster image to a shape. So if you import an image to Inkscape and you have a shape, you can just select both and then go to clip set, and that just trims your raster image. So I made heavy use of that. I basically just brought in a bunch of art and trimmed it down and got a collection of stickers. So once I had all that, I just printed it out on sticker paper. So you can actually get glossy sticker paper. I bought it was like $35 for 100 sheets, and it works great. I just run it through my normal laser printer, and it comes out pretty great. It's better options are possible, but in this kind of case where I basically want to make one-off stickers, I'm not going to make hundreds or thousands of these by hand. I hope all of you do. I hope you grab the files and make mini pinball machines of your own. But for this kind of small scale production, just getting glossy sticker sheets and printing it out is great. So that's about it for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed getting some insight into how we make stuff using all open source tools like FreeCAD and Inkscape. Please be sure to tune in next week, where we'll be releasing a video on the assembly process. So what we'll do then is I'm going to walk through exactly how to take 3D printed parts and the 2D printed stickers and put it all together into a working pinball machine. And we'll also be releasing the files at that time. So if you'd like to get these files for your own, to make your own pinball machine, I'll be releasing the STLs and the images that I use for the stickers, including a blank template so that you can make a custom sticker set if you'd like. Yeah, thanks so much for watching. And if you'd like to see more content about toy design and toy making, please comment, like, and subscribe. Thanks so much. See you next time.